Hey everybody, Charles for HumbleMechanic.com, and today we're pulling wires out of the white Wookie. Alright, so we are pulling the wire loom, wire harnesses, all that jazz out of the engine compartment on the Wookie. This is a vital step because other than the lower part of the engine, that's basically what's left in the compartment. Now, why would I be going to all this trouble to pull all these wires out if I'm not doing a shaved bay or a wire tuck? Well, there's a lot of dirt, there's a lot of crud in these frame pieces under the hood of this car, and I want to get all of that cleaned up as well as do some detailing work underneath the hood, right? We're putting this nice fancy engine back together and putting it in this car. Might as well spend some time to get the engine compartment clean as well. This also gives me the opportunity to inspect all the wires and possibly route some wires in a little bit different way. Some of the wires on the Mark III engines were just kind of blah there, and this will be a great opportunity to clean this up. I'm also going to be removing the cowl trim and the wipers. I'm going to give you guys some tips on removing the wiper arms because sometimes those can be really tricky, and if you're not careful, pop, easy to bust a windshield. At some point in the process, we're going to need to remove this driver's side cowl trim as well. In order to do that, we're going to have to take the wiper blade arms off. This is a generally pretty easy thing. However, the wiper arms do have a tendency to seize up on the wiper transmission. Now, we're going to need to remove the two 13mm nuts. What I like to do is actually just crack them loose and leave them both on until I have the wiper arm loose. Next, I like to use a little bit of spray lubricant and soak the mounting points. Now comes the tricky part. With the nuts loose but still on, sometimes you can just give the wiper arm a little wiggle like this in an up and down motion and it'll come loose. You can actually see how loose that is. This is loose of the wiper transmission. What you don't want to do is just start banging on it or pulling on it, because if you do it wrong, you can actually break the windshield. Now that it's loose, we can relieve a little bit of pressure by pushing on the pivot point, taking the nut off. I like to just lay it right here and walking the wiper arm off. You can see the splines right here on the wiper transmission mate with splines on the arm. The arm is actually conical, so it tightens down even further when you put the nut on. Also, if it's going to be a while, don't hesitate to label these passenger side and driver's side. It's typically pretty easy to tell, even if you get them installed wrong, that you got it installed wrong, but don't hesitate to throw a piece of masking tape on it and label it right and left. Go ahead and do the same thing for the driver's side. Again, just nice and easy up and down motion like that. That'll get almost all of them loose. There are times where that will not loosen it, and you have to use something like a wiper arm puller or a battery terminal puller. I've even, at some point, been able to tap this portion with a dead blow rubber mallet, and it works, but you gotta be really, really careful not to hit it so hard that the wiper arm hits the windshield, because I've seen a lot of windshields broken by doing that. Again, we'll just go ahead and pull it off. Now we can simply take both our wiper arms and set them to the side and remove the rest of the cowl trim. I've already removed the wiring from the passenger side of the engine compartment and got as much stuff out of the way as I could. There's a lot of wires in the engine compartment of this vehicle. Obviously, the newer cars have even more, but this all is just kind of laying there in front. So when we go back together with this, we're also going to be cleaning up the engine compartment and perhaps some of these wires, maybe routing differently, lengthening harnesses, shortening harnesses, all in an effort to make a cleaner looking engine compartment. This is not going to be a shaved bay. This is not going to be a wire tuck. This is simply going to be cleaning up the engine compartment. Some of the things that you want to really be careful when you're doing stuff like this is not to break parts, right? It's really easy, especially when cars get old, to break things like these wire loom retainers or hoses. This is a hose that goes to the rear washer jet that broke. The hose to the front washer jet, it also broke. So take great care and make sure that you're not just taking harnesses and yanking on them. We want to be very, very deliberate in our movements and our motions to make sure we don't break anything. Also, it's a good idea to keep like components together as always. Like this relay I just left on the bracket, that should be no problem, and it'll make sure that we get it back where it belongs. Also, the really cool thing about harnesses, especially on cars that are older, they tend to retain a memory, which means that this harness, when it goes back in the car, is going to go about like this. So if there were a case where it was trying to go up here, obviously this is not realistic, but you can really tell that the harness just wasn't meant to go that way. Another really good thing is not all, but most Volkswagen connectors are considerably different. That means you're going to have a really hard time plugging something in a spot that it shouldn't be plugged in. You do still have to be careful and pay attention to make sure that you're not plugging the wrong thing in. One really good idea is to go ahead and label components with tape. This is just some masking tape where I wrote washer jet pump on, so I know that this harness goes to the washer jet. Most of the time you can figure out where it goes, but hey, anything we can do to make this job easier is going to pay off in the long run. So like I mentioned, I already did the passenger side. I have the ECM removed. The passenger side harness does run along the front of the firewall here. That's all laying off to the driver's side fender. Next, we're going to start pulling the driver's side harness. I'm actually going to leave the hood release cable where it is. I'm going to pull as much of this stuff away from the frame rail as I can. Also, check out how much dirt, grime, debris gets built up in here. This can also hold water. This can, in worst case scenarios, lead to frames rusting out. I also have a vacuum pump here tucked in the fender well. Let's go ahead and remove that. We'll go ahead and take our connector off. We also have a vacuum hose. Let's see if we can get it out without taking the fender liner out. And we'll fight it and fight it. This is what lives behind the driver's side fender. This is one of those components that it's a really good idea to test and make sure it works before putting it back in the car. This will be a really good opportunity to find some tape and label this vacuum hose. Now I'm going to do my best to not have to remove the ABS module. That may be easier said than done. These harnesses are pretty thick, which means that they can be challenging to move around. This is our throttle cable. I'm going to lay this over the other way for now. You know, these little connectors with the springs have been a super pain in the butt. What I've actually been doing on a lot of these is just pulling the spring off altogether and then putting it back on after I disconnect it. You definitely don't want to lose those. Next, we have this big harness. Now we have a choice to make. We can pull the fender liner off on the driver's side to disconnect this ABS connector, which is going to happen at some point, or we can just pull the grommet out, and that gives us enough room to hopefully get all of this harness up and out of the way. Patrick, there's times where I just want to use it to just slash this stuff and not take my time and be patient with all this. It can be kind of frustrating dealing with these big harnesses. They're so thick and rigid in spots that it can be annoying, like that loom retainer that I just broke, which I think is pretty good because that's the first retainer that I've broke so far. You can also grab something like a trim tool and basically slide it along a loom at the bottom, and then if there's any trim clips holding it, you'll have easy access to get them loose. So that freed up even more room for us here. This is also a good place to look for spiders and creepy crawlies and things like that. Moving all these harnesses is definitely an exercise in patience. What gets even worse is going back together with it. This is why taking a lot of pictures and a lot of video really, really helps. And I did a bunch of that. So if you guys are doing anything like this, feel free to use these videos to help you put things back exactly where they came from. I'm sure at some point I'll be referring back to these. So now we got this really, really big wire loom that I'm working around. And boy, wouldn't it be easier if this connector just wasn't there altogether. This is a ground strap for the hood. That's not going back on till, well, obviously until we get a hood on. But that one particular is definitely not going back. I like to use the term gently manhandle when I'm working with harnesses. You need to be a little assertive with it, but you don't want to just rip and tear and pry and, you know, try and basically destroy the harness. You want to be careful, but you definitely want to be a little forceful with it, just not to the point where you're going to rip a wire apart. So there we go. This is the washer jet. That one's probably going to get deleted anyway. I think that was the rear washer, which will probably get removed. So we can throw our vacuum lines off to the side. This is basically the same thing I did with the cabbie when I was pulling the harness out of it. Just pull as much out as I could and lay it over the fenders. Go ahead and get the harness out of here for the wiper motor. Of course, the wiper motor will be coming out too. Obviously, the car's had work done to it. Volkswagen doesn't use white zip ties, and they do a little bit better job of cutting them. And let's see if I can shove my hand back here and unplug this horn. The only fuel tank that I've seen recently get replaced was due to impact damage on, I want to say, a Passat. Oh, and I take that back. We had a B5 and a half Passat come in with the fuel tank leaking like that old recall from a number of years ago, where the what was it? One of the plastic vent lines would leak. It would crack and cause a fuel leak. Never a super fun job to do, and the pay on it kind of sucked. It wasn't bad when we were doing them a fair amount, but boy, when you haven't done one in a while, it's not awesome. Went ahead and took the wiper motor off just to, one, get it out of the way. It was coming off anyway, and two, to make the rest of this a little bit easier. Go ahead and put our bolts and nuts back where they came from. Probably just take the horn off altogether too, and finish out getting everything out of there. Yeah, so Andrew, I don't know, man. That's weird on the tank. What's been the problem with them? Not taking fuel, I assume. That's kind of a common fuel tank replacement situation. Went ahead and removed the horn from the cowl area, as well as a couple of temp sensors. Lay those off to the side. Obviously, you don't want to just throw these wires off the fender of your car. You want to make sure you have a fender cover or something like that protecting it. Even though this car will eventually get a respray, I don't want to cost myself any more time, money, or anything like that just because I'm being lazy. You really see this mass of wires under the hood of this car. All that just to make a VR6 happy. Now what we'll also do, there's a plastic retainer right here. It's one of the coolant bottle bolts that I dropped the other day. I'll also disconnect this and pull the rest of these back out of the way. More wires that go into the cabin. There's some wires that go, where does this go? Oh, this is the ABS module. Disconnect that. That'll free up some more room. So next I'm going to have to take the wheel liner out to disconnect this connector. Same thing for the other side. I'm also going to be really, really careful, like ultra careful, and remove these wire clips from their retaining posts. And I'm going to set these somewhere extra special to make sure that I don't misplace any of them. There's a handful on the other side as well. You can sometimes also twist these off. If you got the room for it, that's the preferred way, so that you really don't run any risk of damaging them. Now, these might not all be going back in, depending on the routing of some of these harnesses. I may route some of them differently. It all depends on what we end up keeping, what we end up deleting, what we end up adding, if anything. So I'm going to remain pretty open and flexible with what I'm doing here. It's not pretty. It sure is better than it was. So I'll probably save pulling the wheel speed sensors and whatnot for another time. All right, so there we have it. Just about all the wires gutted from the engine compartment, and awesome documentation on how it all goes back together. Hey, if you had any questions or comments, post it in the comments section. If you like the video, throw it a thumbs up on YouTube. I always appreciate that. You can also subscribe on YouTube or on the blog at humblemechanic.com. Follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, the blog, and of course on Snapchat. All right, guys, hey, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.